Today, we're talking to emergency room physician Dr. Brittany Lamb about medical decision making, especially for dementia family caregivers.
Yeah, so my name is Brittany Lamb. I'm an emergency medicine physician. And so I work full time night shifts in the ER. But then outside of the emergency department, I help dementia families anticipate and learn about and plan for the medical decisions that they're going to have to make on behalf of someone living with dementia. So that's what I do. I have a Facebook group and I do lots of stuff on social media. I write a blog. And then I also developed a course for caregivers. Yeah.
That's that's awesome. Can you share a little bit about how obviously I imagine this sort of spawned out of your profession, how medical decision making became important to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, medical decision making is what I do, and we do it very quickly in the emergency department. And so I see people struggling with it a lot, and not just families of people living with dementia, just all of us, really. And what I've found, I've been working in the ER for almost a decade now. And what I've found is that it's really interesting to me as a person that, they've been diagnosed with conditions, diseases, whatever, and aging also, right? As we age, we pick up medical issues. We're more at risk for different medical issues. It's very interesting to me that we're not giving people tools and access to the educational information about how those things progress and how they could potentially get worse and create complications that could affect the way that person lives on a day to day. It just always kind of struck me as odd that we're not helping people plan for what is like what they're at risk for essentially. Like we know what people are at risk for. We know the conditions that happen as people age. And when people are living with dementia, everything becomes more complicated, which is why I decided to come online and help caregivers, family members of people making their decisions because it's not so straightforward, when somebody is having a stroke who's living with dementia or someone's having a heart attack, all the care that we do for that person can become way more complicated because they have disease in their brain, whatever disease is causing their particular dementia symptoms. So it's what I do and it's what I see people struggling with. And it's so hard for me to help them because they're so overwhelmed and stressed out right there in the ER. It's not the best place to figure out what living means to you, what quality of life means to you, what kind of care you want. Do you want your life prolonged? Like, what is aggressive care? Like, these are big, questions. And it's a bit frustrating, to know that these things are very likely to happen and to not be able to help people plan for them. So that's why I came online because it was honestly causing me some moral injury, which is what I think like burnout is in people who are healthcare workers. So I decided not to be quiet about it anymore. And instead of being irritated, to actually try to do something to help. So
I thank you. Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and I think it's super helpful to people to have education and resources to be able to do this. You started talking about, what medical decision planning is.
yeah,
I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that, and then also the connection between legal, medical, and financial planning,
yeah.
um, because they're connected.
Yes, they're all it's all interconnected. And so medical decision planning is basically a term that I use essentially. And what I tell people that they can do is you can look at, what your age is, what medical problems you've been diagnosed with, and then what those problems put you at risk for. Things like heart disease. And there's lots of different types of heart disease because your heart is a complex organ. So it can fail in different ways. And, so heart disease is a big category, but then, stroke and infection, there's you can really get down and figure out what conditions specifically you are at risk for based on your medical history and the fact that you're an aging human being, because we all are. We're all aging unless we pass away. And so then once you've nailed down those conditions that you're at risk for or have learned about the diseases or conditions you already have and how they can progressively get worse, like heart failure, COPD, these condition diabetes, like we can't cure them. So it's good to know like what they can do to your body going forward. Once you know those things that you're at risk for, you can start learning about how they're treated. and, this spectrum of aggression, okay, and how you treat them. And you can start thinking about, okay, well, right now, my goals of care are this, like I have good quality of life, and based on your goals now and into the future, you can kind of write down like what treatments you'd be okay with now. And then if your life changed, your quality of life changed, depending on your values, your goals, your overall goals of care might change. And so you would pick less, most people would pick less aggressive treatment over time. Not everybody has those values, but that's very common. So that's what medical decision planning is. It's identifying what your goals of care are now and going into the future, and then learning about the conditions you're at risk for, how those things are treated, and then how those treatment options line up with different goals of care. So you can actually like write a plan. I teach my clients how to do this inside of a spreadsheet, and it's kind of nerdy, but it's a written plan so that when they're then in the emergency department and they have this condition, they can look at the spreadsheet and say, oh, here's the condition. These are our goals of care. And these are the treatment options that kind of fall within those goals right now. So that's medical decision planning. And the reason why it intersects with the legal and the financial system is that, as we age and as we develop conditions, there's cost associated with caring for folks, and it's a real thing. I mean, I know money is an emotional topic, and thinking about, our aging journey and how our life is gonna change as we age or develop diseases is emotional, but we need a plan for how we're gonna pay for care, And I stress for caregivers that I see a lot of people making sacrifices for their family members, which I think is I understand it. I've done the same thing. In my own family, we've had disease, and you step in and you step up and you sacrifice your time, you sacrifice your money because you love the person and you have the best intentions. But if you don't create a plan, you can very easily overextend yourself, and people forget because we're givers, right? You want to help your family member, you forget that you could impact your own financial situation and your health because they're connected. If you don't have a job, you don't have benefits, you spend all your retirement money trying to help, pay for someone's care, like what happens to you? Um, and then the legal system, intersects in there as well because, people have assets. We have to plan for people's estates. But then the legal system has the entry point for the document. So like the advanced care planning document. So advanced directives fall kind of within the legal system. And those documents are like a living will or a medical power of attorney. And those are different than medical order forms, which we can talk about later. But they kind of hold the key to those advanced care planning documents, which is interesting to me also because attorneys are not doctors. And so how do you write a living will that's very specific to you, um, and with an attorney? And so that's something else that I've kind of struggled with. I have a bone to pick about those documents. I write about it on my blog. Um, but yeah, they all go hand in hand. I mean, they're the pillars of planning. So the pillars of planning are medical, legal, financial, and then as a caregiver, there's a lot of mindset work that people need help with. So I hope that was not too long-winded.
No, that was great. I have, many follow-up questions. I was just taking some notes about things that you've said.
Okay.
Um, Maybe we can start with, you talked about goals of care.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit more about what that means? Like, are there sort
Yeah.
of set goals that you might choose from, like a buffet, or is this like choose your own adventure?
Yeah, so I teach goals of care based in like 3 categories, 3 main categories. I think it's just much easier for people. There's kind of subcategories within there, but the 3 main ones are full treatment, which is you're gonna do everything, right? And that's most people's overall medical, like, healthcare goals of care, for most of our life, which is why we don't do this work. So this is why this doesn't happen. And it's uncomfortable even for healthcare professionals to talk with people about this stuff because for so long it's implied that we want to live and we want quality of life. So full treatment is the first goal of care category. The second one is some but not all. And so, I mean, it's vague for a reason because there's a spectrum of aggression, of aggressive care that falls within there. The first thing that someone would kind of give up, if you will, to fall into that category is if they did not want to have CPR anymore. And CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, is only done when someone is actively dying. So they do not have a pulse and they're not breathing. So a lot of people, it's very reasonable for them to have a do not resuscitate. And there's a whole host of issues that goes along with that, and things that people should learn about if they're interested in potentially having a DNR or putting one in place for a person that they're caring for. I write about the do not resuscitate on my blog also. Um, and so that's the first thing that you would kind of give up to go in the some but not all category. And then the last goal of care category is comfort. So when someone is in that goal of care, it's not that we're not going to provide care. We're going to provide care. They can still be hospitalized. They can still have surgery. The intention of the care should be to provide comfort. The intention of the care should not be to prolong someone's life first. It should be to provide comfort first. If we prolong their life, okay, so, so be it. That's fine. But those folks, don't want care that would intentionally prolong their life as the underlying reason for why we're doing it. So there's quite a bit of pick and choose within each category as how you would want to receive care. So those are the main goals of care categories. It's basically like how aggressive do you want your medical care to be?
Yeah, that's helpful. I think that breaks down what you mean by goals of care and how to start to build a plan. You've talked a little bit about like a DNR, advanced directives, medical order forms. Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit more about those? Like what are they? And then how do you layer in medical planning? Because you said, these are sort of legal forms. So how do you then mash it up with the medical planning?
Yeah. So advanced directives are different than medical order forms. So advanced directives are done by a person in advance and they direct how they would want their healthcare to be. And there's two main types of forms. One are forms that allow you to name a person that you want to speak on your behalf if you're not able to. And those names are different in a lot of different states, but one of the most common is medical power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, healthcare surrogate, healthcare proxy. Those are all names for that type of form. And you can do this without an attorney. You can do it online. I think like LegalZoom and those kinds of sites you can use. And then the other type of advanced directive are things like a living will or five wishes. These are documents that allow you to write down care that you would be okay with, or care that you would not be okay with. What I find is that because they're oftentimes done with an attorney, they don't consider all the different conditions a person's at risk for, so they're not super specific. And then the other thing is it's very hard to write down, when you would want certain treatments and when you wouldn't on that document. Like saying that you never want to be intubated on a ventilator, being on a machine. For some people, that's very reasonable. Like I understand that choice, but there are conditions where you may be okay with going on a ventilator in some situations, but not in others. Maybe if the underlying condition could be treated and you might be able to get back to where you were from a quality of life standpoint, you might be okay with trialing that aggressive care because that is aggressive care. I mean, it's artificial like life support essentially. So but then there are conditions where if it was unlikely that you would regain your quality of life, you might not want to go on a ventilator. And so making a blanket statement about whether or not you would want to be on a ventilator could be a little bit dangerous, just depending on the person's goals. So but those are advanced directives. And medical order forms are different. So those are actual ways to direct care that are put into an order. So paramedics, nurses, doctors, everybody who takes care of that person looks at that as an order form and follows it. So it's when we get advanced directives, when we receive those in the hospital, like medical power of attorney, living will, five wishes, those things are up for interpretation. We read them, but they don't tell us what to do. They're not specific. An order form is specific. And there's really only two types of medical order forms. And it also, again, depends on what state you live in. Do not resuscitate is everywhere. So a do not resuscitate form, it only applies to when someone has no pulse and is not breathing. So the person is actively dying. That's when we do CPR. And that's what a DNR tells us whether or not a person would want that. Most of the time, people fill out do not resuscitate order forms when they don't want CPR. So it's pretty rare that I see one that says that they do want CPR. They're usually, you know, then the other medical order form is the pulsed form, which is it's a there is a national form now, and POLST used to stand for Physician Orders for Life Sustaining Treatment, but now they've just made it a word. So it's just one word, POLST. And each state can have a version of that form if they want to. Like in Maryland, it's MOLST, and Massachusetts and New York, I think they also use MOLST. But basically, that is an order form that's an expansion of the do not resuscitate. So it talks about other types of care someone would want if they're not actively dying. And it depends on what your state's form is, what they're using. But a lot of times they'll actually write on there, like, do you want full treatment? Do you want selective or some but not all treatment, or do you want comfort treatment? And then you can get a little bit more specific on those forms, but they're order forms. So if a paramedic comes to your house or goes to a living facility where your person's living, they're supposed to follow that form. And one of the most powerful things about them is that you can oftentimes they will say that a person doesn't want to be transferred to the hospital unless their comfort needs can't be met. Or if they go to the hospital, they would prefer to stay out of the intensive care unit. That's very powerful language for someone like me who would receive that form as an ER doctor in the emergency department. That's going to help me know what type of care is okay or not. And they're not any replacement for conversations, but when you bring in an advanced directive, I have to read that and interpret it. I have to talk to somebody. But in order form, I don't have to talk to anybody right away. Like I know kind of what to do right now. So they're very powerful tools. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a super helpful overview, and I totally understand sort of the stress that you experience when, you're making these decisions quickly and having one or the other is gonna be more useful.
Yeah.
Um, I guess these forms I guess I wanna ask about how you actually make a medical decision plan, and it sounds like these forms kind of come after you've, like, set goals of care, but that could be incorrect. I guess, like, if I'm a caregiver and I'm trying to make, a medical decision plan
Yeah.
for my care recipient, what's step 1? How do I start?
Yeah. So I would recommend that you you compile your person's medical history. You need to get your person's entire medical history gathered first. And I know people get frustrated when I tell them to do this. They tell me, "Oh, it's all on the chart, it's all on the record." But no, it might be, but humans do that, and there's room for error, right? So you have to take ownership. If you're going to be somebody who's going to be making medical decisions on behalf of another person, you have to take ownership of their health care, what's happened to them before, what's happening to them now. It tells you what's going to happen to them in the future, what's likely to happen. And so if you don't understand their medical history, you're going to struggle. And so I tell people step one is you got to compile the medical history. So if they've been hospitalized, what's happened to them in the hospital, all the conditions that they have, you would wanna gather notes from the hospital, from any specialist they see, like a cardiologist, a neurologist, a kidney doctor, a nephrologist. All of these different people, they write their notes in more detail according to that disease or that condition, that organ that they take ownership of. So you wanna compile all those records, and you wanna make this document for yourself because it helps you just organize your thoughts. So that's step 1, and then the next step is really starting to learn about how those things can go sideways and those conditions your person has, like how can they get worse? What's the natural progression of those diseases? And then what conditions do they put your person at risk for? And that work, if you're a dementia family caregiver, you can come to me because that's what I teach. I teach all the complications of people who are living with different diseases that cause dementia and aging medical complications. But what I do is specific for dementia family caregivers. If you're not in that situation, you can start going to your person's doctor, to each of those doctors and saying, "Hey, how does this get worse? What does serious illness look like? What they might need to be hospitalized for?" And then you can start learning what the treatment options are. But so compiling their medical history is incredibly important, but then also defining goals of care. And so if your person's still able to make their own medical decisions and they're still able to speak and advocate for themselves, those are conversations, those are conversations that need to be had. And what I tell people to do is, don't start asking, like, do you want to go on a ventilator? Do you want CPR? Like, do not start there. You want to start with, like, what does living mean to you? What does quality of life mean to you? Like, what are things about your day that you would not be okay living in a certain way? Or, if you're in a situation where you're requiring assistance with your body, like someone taking care of your body physically, you know, what would be okay and not okay? Like, what do you want us to know? One of the things my grandmother said that really stuck with me when I asked her about these things, because I want to know what she wants because I know I'm going to be involved helping her. She's in her early 80s. So, she said to me, I'm okay with people helping take care of my body. But if I get to a point where I can't communicate, that hurts, that's too cold, that's too hot, I can't say thank you, I can't like converse with this person, and they can't understand what I mean and I can't understand what they mean, then that's not living to me. That's not quality of life. So that was really eye opening to me. And I think a lot of people have that kind of feeling. So, but quality of life, what someone's values of it are, against the length of life, like that's a big thing we have to determine so we can determine goals of care. And then we have to figure out what their medical history is and what they're at risk for. Those are the foundational steps before you can really, create a plan. And then you can get more specific inside these other documents. But do not resuscitate and the pulse form are used more towards, well, the pulse forms used more towards when someone not necessarily end of life. It's just that their goals are that they don't want as aggressive care. And do not resuscitate forms can be used, when you turn 85 years old, you might want to consider having a do not resuscitate form. It depends on what your goals are, but those are the first things I would recommend.
Yeah, and you mentioned, talking to your care recipient, your person about what their goals are and what living means to them. What do you recommend to people who are caring for someone that's no longer capable of sharing that or making their own medical decisions?
Yeah. So when somebody's lost capacity to make their own medical decisions, there's a few things. One, they can't name a medical decision maker. So hopefully they've done that work. And two, they can't do advanced directives like a living will or five wishes. They can't do those things anymore because they've lost capacity or competency, which is the permanent loss of capacity. Um, so you have to do the work on their behalf. You have to figure out what you think that they would say, and so I tell people, what do you think your person's goals of care would be? And we have to get kind of in their mindset, in their shoes, and think about how they would answer questions and what their values are. But also remember that a person who is no longer able to choose, if they did have a brain that was functioning like it used to, they would be able to learn and apply this information to their situation presently. And so you have to do that work for them. People's goals of care often change, throughout their lives. And just because someone isn't able to say that anymore doesn't mean that you're not able to do that on their behalf, essentially. Um, so we speak as they would speak, but we also know that they would be capable of learning and taking in this information and applying it and changing their mind based on what they've said before. Which is one of the issues I find with the advanced directives, like the living will. Like I had a patient several months ago that had a living will that said that she wanted everything done. Essentially, like she wanted life support and she wanted heroic measures. I don't remember what exact words it said on there. But basically, when I read it, I was like, oh, this woman wants everything done. But she was living with dementia, and that document was done when she was in her 60s, and she's now in her 80s. And I'm talking to her husband, and he's like, oh, no. Oh, no, no. I'm thinking about we need to do not resuscitate. I don't think she's going to want to be in the hospital anymore. He's like, how can I protect her from people like you, doctor? And that's what I was concerned about because we almost put her in the hospital. And I was like, okay, well, this is what this document says. So I caution people in taking those documents at face value because we all learn and grow as people as we age. So anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have a follow-up question. I have a question before my next question is, how frequently should someone like, if you first write your advanced directive or any of these documents when you're, I don't know, 60, how frequently should you be revisiting them?
Yeah, so anytime your health changes, essentially, if you had a hit to your health, or have a new diagnosis, it's worth considering, updating them. Um, and so, that's why I would find an attorney that really feels comfortable having these conversations. Elder law attorneys are good at this. I do. There's a service that I've recently learned about, and I met the director of it. It's called Mideo, Mideo, and it's a way to do video advanced directives. And so, for some people who are receiving care, it may be appropriate. It's not going to work for people who don't have capacity. So if you can't make your own medical decisions, it's not going to work. But for the caregivers, for people out there who are caring for someone else, when you go through this process and you start to feel very strongly about what happens to you, this would be a good service because they will reach out to you and say, "Hey, we need you to come back and we need to make sure this is updated." And they turn this session with you into, a material like physical materials, and then there's a QR code. And so, like someone like me in the ER, I mean, I'm always going to have my phone scan the QR code to watch this video that gives me an idea about what you would want. And it also turns some of this into paperwork as well. So it's a service I think people might want to know about as caregivers. It's MIDEO, MIDEO. Um, Especially for people who don't have children. So, we're gonna have a lot of people who are solo, we call them solo agers, and you want your goals and wishes to be respected. So that's another tool that could be used for them. So, but yeah, you need to update it anytime something happens. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's helpful. And we'll include that link. I'm gonna check out Midio, but we'll also include that
Yeah.
link
Yeah.
here. You still were talking about, this husband who was caring for his wife. Um, and I want to expand on that a little bit. Just, what kind of communication skills do people need to have or improve to be a better advocate for their person, both like with their family, but also with their care team?
Yeah. So, I think that if you do work in understanding your person's medical history, I think that that will really help you communicate. But I also tell people, like, your person better than we do. You know what would be okay and not okay. And like, you need to speak up, do not be afraid of us. Like, do not feel intimidated. Like, ask questions. Please do, because I mean, I've been in healthcare now for over a decade, but I've been working in the ER exclusively for almost a decade. And, we're focused more on service, and sometimes it frustrates me. I'm like, this isn't a Wendy's, this isn't Applebee's. I'm really sorry that you haven't gotten your warm blanket and your sandwich, but like, we've been running around trying to save people from dying, but we do care about people. We want people to be comfortable with the choices that they make. We want people to understand what is actually happening. I mean, this is it you only get one body, it's your health. It's incredibly important. I mean, I would say it's our number one asset, right? Our health, right? And so you have to take ownership of that when you're advocating for someone else, that you're speaking for them. So I would say that definitely learning about the things that are going on with them will help you communicate better. Stepping up and asking questions when things don't make sense, I think, is really important. And then the other thing is recognizing that physicians and nurses and those of us doing this job, we're so used to keeping people alive as the default. We're so used to doing things to people that may not be appropriate for your person, and we may not ask you. And it's very frustrating, but we may not ask what your person's goals and values and preferences are. In the ER, in the hospital, there's a lack of time. And so I will be quite honest with you all, it is much, much easier to follow the standard of care than it is to broach from that because someone has different values and goals at that time. And it requires conversation and thoughtfulness, and sometimes you have to sit down and talk about this for a while. So if things are not jiving with you, if you're thinking we're going in the wrong direction, you got to step up and say something. And I tell people to always ask, like, what can happen next? What are the next things that you might be calling me about? What are the things that you could see happening coming forward? Because then you can start thinking about how, okay, what are we going to do if those things happen while we're treating whatever's going on. So I just want people to feel comfortable speaking out and making it known that there are certain goals and what quality of life and living means to that person. I mean, I hope that that's helpful.
Yeah, I think something that like I've experienced in healthcare and not in the ER, so this might be a slightly different scenario, but um I'm fairly assertive and pretty confident, and still I felt myself being nervous to ask my doctor for something or to run a test or this kind of thing because I've been like shot down in the past by that doctor or another one. Not entirely sure what my question is, but just like is uh, maybe it's about around confidence for people
Mhm.
and like how can people practice this or how can they build these skills to be more confident
Yeah.
both in decision making and advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that question, to be honest with you, but, like, I can tell you that, in medicine, we do, this may sound strange, but, like, we visualize going through the process of doing something to someone, like a procedure, or, the steps in care, and so we do a lot of, like, simulation and visualization, and so, like, I know that visualization is a powerful technique for folks, and so I do oftentimes recommend to my patients and their families that, especially when I see a lot of patients that come into the emergency department and they have something going on that I cannot diagnose. I recognize that there is a problem, but it's not life threatening. It's not surgical. It's not a bad infection. They don't need to be admitted to the hospital, but something is not right. And I tell folks, like, hey, I want you to document what's going on. Like, write down your thoughts, organize your thoughts, because I think that a lot of times when we go into healthcare settings, we there's so many questions that we get asked, right? You're like constantly being asked all these questions. It can easily derail you from like why you actually came there. And so I think one of the things that you can do is like document what's been going on. Actually, maybe write it down, like on a physical piece of paper or in your phone or something. And like, this is what's been happening. This is the timeline. These are my questions. These are the things I actually want to ask you about, or the things I'm like, should we do this test? Should I see this other doctor? Like, let's talk about these things because it can help you take back some of the control of the conversation. And I think it's frustrating because, there's a lack of time. And so what they're trying to get done and what you're trying to get done, they oftentimes compete against each other, which is very frustrating. But that's one thing that I think kind of visualizing like how the conversation is going to go and already having compiled like that when we ask people questions, we ask them for a reason. Like I'm always asking people the kind of the same questions and they get so frustrated with me. And I'm like, I promise I'm asking you these questions because it helps me figure out what might be happening to you. Um, but yeah, I think that might be something that's helpful is just kind of organizing your thoughts and having a document to go back to.
Yeah, I think that's great. You said you weren't the right person to answer that question, but I think what you just explained is probably very helpful for people when they enter what can be like kind of an overwhelming or unfamiliar, environment. Um, we've talked about, medical decision planning and how to do this for your care recipient. I'm hoping you can just share a little bit about like why might someone do this and what benefits are there to a caregiver to have a medical decision plan in place.
Yeah. So, being a caregiver, I don't know what disease or what condition or why people are a caregiver. So, whatever's going on and why you've been asked to step into this role, like that is a huge task. Like it's huge responsibility. And what I find is that caregivers, they wear a lot of hats. Like they do a lot of things. Like they're cooking, they're the financial person, they're the driver, they're the activities coordinator, they're the, you know, therapist, and there's so many things that you wind up having to do for someone that you're caring for. It just depends on your situation. There's a lot of stress and there's a lot of overwhelm with just meeting those tasks. And what I find is that if people don't do this type of work and thinking about their person's medical future, it's another significant stressor because you have a medical event that happens and it can derail all of those things that you've been doing on a day to day to make your life work and make your person's life work and function, seamlessly. And so, and I oftentimes find too that people don't realize that they're carrying around stress of not knowing what's gonna happen to their person, especially if their person's living in a facility. It's like when I get this phone call, what does this phone call mean, and what am I gonna have to do? What decisions am I gonna have to make? And so, like, this is just a way to take back control over your life, a little bit, and help advocate for your person. If you do medical decision planning, you can make sure, or it's highly more likely that your person will receive the type of care that they would want, which is going to make you feel better. It's going to make you live with less guilt and regret because I see that all the time in the emergency department. They say that we don't have continuity of care in the ER. I can tell you that's nonsense. I see the same patients sometimes over and over again. I've had multiple families. I walk in the room, like, "Oh, Dr. Lamb, you're here." I'm like, "Oh, I don't really remember you, but great," you know? And so it's just a way to take back control, and it gives you peace of mind because this piece, medical decision planning, you do this work and yeah, you check in on it. But like you really only have to do this one time, like for real, like invest your time, over the course of, I would say, depending on how complicated someone's medical history is, when I work with caregivers inside of my program, if you can spend time on this every week, you can have this done in like 2 months. And not do it all week long, like an hour or 2 a week. So, um, I just think that having a plan there for you to fall back on, it's another tool for you, and it's not a legal document, right? Medical decision planning is your own plan on behalf of your person. It's to give you something to go to. So you don't have to turn it in. It's not going to be inspected. You can change your mind. So so yeah, I just think people don't realize, and they make decisions in crisis mode, and I see it, and it hurts. It like hurts me to see people have to do this. And that's what is so frustrating to me because it doesn't have to be this way. It just doesn't. And now that we have access to the internet and we can create online education for people, we can give people what they need to know ahead of these situations so they can make informed choices because you all know what's best for your person. I just met you. I'm just trying to help you, guide you through this process. And same thing in the hospital, but it's just not the best place to make decisions. And that's where the decisions are being made right now. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think just taking one thing off your plate or freeing up some space to do all of the other things that you just listed.
exactly.
Um, you have a program to help people with medical decision planning. Can you tell us a little bit more about that or where people can find it if they're interested in
Yeah.
using
Yeah.
your program?
Yeah, if you're someone who is, caring for or involved in caring for, maybe they don't live with you, but and may live across the country even. But if you're involved in advocating and making medical decisions for someone who's living with dementia, any type of disease that's causing dementia, and your person's not at end of life, so not on hospice, you probably benefit from taking my program. And you can find it at my website. It's www.blam, and it's lamb like a sheep. My first name's Brittany, so blambmd.com. And then it's there on the website. I think it's like if you look at the top right, it says like start your plan now, and you can read about the course. So it's a one-time cost. It's $397. And then if you want any additional family members to come into it, you just send me an email and I can add them. It's $97 to add people. But you pay for this thing one time and you never lose access to it. And it teaches you how to be a medical decision maker for someone living with dementia. It teaches you how to make a medical decision plan for your person. And then why I built it the way I did is because I broke up all the conditions that are likely to happen and created documents for each of them so that there's like questions that you can ask when you're in those situations. And if you're in those situations, you can watch my video to like re-jog your memory about, what's going on and what you need to ask and what you might choose to do. So I think it's highly valuable. Obviously I'm biased, but it's basically if you were talking to a doctor and everything that we want you to know before you come and talk to us. That's what it is, and it's in total, it's like over 8 hours of content, and I deliver it over 8 weeks, and then once you get it, you have access to all of it. But, there's no way if your person's, receiving primary care services, specialty services, even palliative care services, that someone's gonna spend 8 hours of time talking to you and educating you. Um, and so this is for people who are planners, who want to take back control, and they want to know that they are making decisions for their person living with dementia from a place where they feel like their person would choose those things so they can have peace of mind. I mean that, and offload this stress. Like that's what I want for people, is to just get rid of this piece of the stress of things. And I know it's still going to be emotional and still going to be hard when something happens to your person, but I'm hoping that this is going to significantly help people. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing what you just described, even just like the education and content around specific conditions and what this might mean is when you were talking earlier in our conversation about like, what's your primary condition? Do they have something else? Like all these nuances of a person's specific condition or conditions, even just that education feels almost overwhelming to, figure out
Yeah.
like what, this information and what papers we need and all of this. So what you've just described, um, you said you're biased, but as a unbiased person, this does sound like an immense amount of value to a caregiver. We'll be sure to include the link to your website also. To round out our conversation, we love to ask our guests their top tip for caregivers. I'd love to sort of specify the question for you. What is your top tip for navigating the healthcare system as a family caregiver?
Yeah. So I think I've touched on it. It's that I want people to realize that you're the person's advocate and you are allowed to speak for them and you are allowed to advocate for them. And so I want you to ask questions and I want you to feel good after you've left a visit. So, what we talked about, compile what you're trying to get out of that visit. Like write down what your goal is when you go into that office. Like what questions do you need to have asked and answered in order to make that a valuable visit for you? And also be willing to step up and say like, is this following what our goals are? Are we doing the right thing here? Because we put our heads down as doctors and specialists, like especially specialists, cardiologists, nephrologists. We're just wired in a certain way. We put our heads down and we go, 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 and we do. And just because we can do things doesn't necessarily mean we should. And so you all know what's best. You really do. And so step into that power. Step into it because we need you to help us. We really do. The other thing I'll say is that I do want to plug another podcast for caregivers. It's a I'm like there's lots of tips. There's so many tips. It's hard for me, but there's a lot of people have issues around boundary setting and the mindset piece of being a caregiver. And so there is a podcast by Kay Coughlin. It's from one caregiver to another, and it's like it's about boundary setting. And so I think people should check out that podcast if you're having any struggles there, because some of why I think we have trouble advocating for ourselves in the healthcare system is because of that. And there's like mindset work and boundary kind of work that we need to do. So that's that's my tip. Those are my tips.
I love it. I love those tips. We will look up that podcast and also share that link so we just get everyone all the resources. Thank you so much for your time and sharing so much information. Again, we'll be sure to link to you so people can come and use your support to make a medical decision plan.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy here. If anyone has any questions, you can find I think my email address is on my website. You can always shoot me an email and then, join my email list or start reading my blog. Anybody can read the blog. So everything that I do is slanted and geared towards dementia families, but there's a lot of stuff on there that I think a lot of caregivers would benefit from. So, but reach out to me if you need help. I'm here. I'm here for it.